Hello again, Roy.RealEstate Realtor here with Coldwell Banker Legacy in San Angelo. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about all the things that can be negotiated in a contract. It's interesting to me that the contract to buy a house is 10 pages long, plus you generally have a third-party financing addendum that's 2 more pages. But on that 10 pages plus 12 pages, there's really only about 8 things you can negotiate. And really, for the most part, there's only about 3 or 4 of them that are generally negotiated. You know, there's a lot of tradition in real estate. And so there's certain things that are typically paid on one side or the other, and you generally don't negotiate them, but you can. I'm just going to run through the list and talk about all the things that can and can't be negotiated, or all the things that can be, and if they can't, you don't need to worry about them. So, the first and most obvious one is the price. Interesting part about it, when you actually make an offer to purchase a property, you put on there what type of financing you're going to have and whether or what your down payment amount is going to be. So if you're borrowing money on a $200,000 house, you put down that, hey, I'm going to pay $40,000 down and finance $160,000 or whatever the numbers are. That's at a 20%. But whatever those are, you disclose those to the seller so they can use that in deciding on their decision, plus the simple dollar amount of what you're buying the house for. So that's the first thing, and again, that's the biggest thing people think of when they negotiate. The second thing is earnest money. The amount of earnest money you have to put up and when you have to put it up. If you get an option period in your contract, then one of the things you sometimes will do is say, hey, I don't want to pay the earnest money until after the option period's over. Because during that option period, I may find something wrong with the house that the seller's not willing to fix. If I do, I don't want it to put up the earnest money. So you can negotiate that. Both the timing of it and the amount of it can be negotiated. The title policy. Almost every transaction, particularly if they're financed, every transaction, there will be a title policy paid. So that title policy is insurance, basically against claims against the title. So if there's an old lien from years ago, there's an encroachment on it, all sorts of different things that can affect the title, clear title of that property, those are insured in that title policy. Typically around here, the seller pays that. And then there's a few little minor items in there where there's different exceptions you can have removed for a little extra money that can be negotiated as well. But again, typically in our area, the seller is actually the one paying for that, but it doesn't have to be that way. It is negotiable. Second and related closely to that is a survey. If a survey is required, which a lot of times it's not, if there's an existing survey and nothing's changed, no survey is required. But if a survey is required, then again, typically around here, the seller will pay for that, but it is negotiable. And both when it's due, when it's required, stuff like that, the timing of it is part of that. Home warranty is another thing, and this one is fairly commonly negotiated. A lot of times the buyer will ask the seller to provide a home warranty for 1 year or something like that. And usually, and those in the vicinity of $500, there's some different plans and stuff, and it varies with a little bit with the type of home and stuff, but $500 is a fairly reasonable amount. So the buyer will ask the seller to pay for a home warranty for 1 year to cover things that might break in the house, and that's fairly commonly negotiated. Another thing is an option period. Generally, in this area, we do have an option period. You'll pay a certain amount, an option fee up front for an option period, and again, that's generally 10 days, but that's negotiable as well. The amount of it is negotiable. There has to be some amount change hands because you're literally buying an option. And so the law basically says that there has to be some amount, a reasonable amount, which is never defined, of course. So there's tradition in the amount, but that's not the case. And the thing with the option fee is the seller gets to keep that. If you pay for an option on a piece of property and you back out of it, then the seller gets to keep that option money. And then at the end, it may or may not be applied to the purchase of the property, depending on what's specified in there. Sometimes that's a way you can, if they get to keep that and it doesn't count toward the property, if you're in competition trying to buy a house, that can be something that you can throw in there to add. Next thing that's, we kind of have a normal way of doing it at about 30 to 45 days, but it's closing date. Closing date is negotiable, particularly, and a lot of times it matters a lot if it's new construction or something. Obviously that's important, when you need to move in. But it's really negotiable in anything. If you have a lease to a certain date and you want to stay in, you can negotiate that, but you are negotiating. I had one recently that the buyer had a lease to a point, and they wanted to try to close basically at the end of that lease so that they didn't have to be paying for the lease that they were already committed to and the house they were buying. The seller wasn't willing to do that. It was another 30 days longer than what was normal, so they decided they weren't willing to do that, but it is a negotiable point. The next one is seller pay closing cost. Now, this is cost that the seller pays on behalf of the buyer. The cost that would normally be buyer cost, home inspections, termite inspections, all things like that, even insurance, the proration of the taxes, all the things that a buyer would have to bring to the table at closing, they can ask the seller to pay for them. There's some restrictions if it's VA or FHA on what that can be. Again, this is one of the ones that is very commonly part of an offer in our area and is typically negotiated. So that's one. It just basically it makes the buyer have to bring a lot less money to the table at closing, and that's so it nets, in effect, reduces the net that the seller is getting, but they get to sell the house. And it's, again, typically, especially in the mid to lower value houses, it's very, very common in this area. So that's all the ones on that 10-page contract. That's it. And then there's also, again, generally that third-party financing addendum. And that is where the buyer says, this is the type of financing I'm going to get, the interest rate I expect to get, and if I don't get that they have an out. And all those are negotiable. How long that the lender has to give them a buyer approval, that can be negotiated. What happens if there is not buyer approval? Are you committed? Do you lose your earnest money? Things like that. All those can be in there. And even then, the amount of the down payment, again, could be negotiated. Now, because if you're selling a house and one person's coming in with a 20% down payment and another person's coming in with 3.5% or zero down payment, you might think that the one with the larger down payment is less risk. And so it is something that can be done in the type of loan, whether it's a conventional or a VA or an FHA or even one of the other types, or cash, because a cash buyer is definitely in a stronger financial position and able to negotiate better. So all those things can be negotiated. They're generally not much, because generally you have a buyer that has whatever kind of financing they're planning on doing. And it's not real common for someone to try to negotiate. So you applied with a VA, we'd rather you get a conventional. It doesn't happen very often, but there is a potential there. And because of VA and FHA requiring repairs, there are some houses when they list them, they'll say we don't want a VA or FHA because we don't want to have to do those lender required repairs. So anyway, there's really just those about 8 or 9 things that can be negotiated in a 12-page agreement. Most of the rest of it is standard language that's promulgated by the Texas Real Estate Commission, and there's fill in the blanks on different things, but really those are about the only things you actually have the ability to negotiate on. It's kind of interesting to think in 12 pages you've got 9 real points of negotiation, and 3 of those are the ones that happen most of the time. So anyway, just thought of all the things that are out there that, hey, in certain situations you might want to negotiate this and not even think about it. So questions, comments, whatever, give me a call. Roy.RealEstate, 325-268-0775. Thank you.